You put your money in the bank and you make about that much, and then you go borrow money from the bank and they charge you about this much. Does that seem like a very good deal? The reason 70, 80, 90% of the people in this country are experiencing financial tension is real simple. They don't have any money in green circles. They need $5,000. They're going to go borrow the bank's money, right? And they're going to pay that much for it. Meanwhile, they got money in the bank that they're making this much. And I'll ask them, I say, why didn't you take this money out and go buy it? I said, well, then we wouldn't have any money in green circles. See the problem?
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us today. And we want to get started by hearing your story of how you discovered becoming your own banker or the infinite banking concept, which came first, and how did you find out about it?
So I'm a former high school math teacher, football coach, and I got into the financial business in May of 1985. So that was 40 years ago. And I was in the financial world for about 24 years. I started with a company, Franklin Life, out of Springfield, Illinois. All we could sell at Franklin Life was basically whole life, term, fixed annuities, and I got a really good education about how whole life insurance products work. But for 24 years, I worked with mainly with teachers because I was a teacher. And then in July of 2009, my son-in-law's neighbor was getting into the insurance business, and she wanted me, she gave my son-in-law Nelson's book, and then another book, and she and another guy wanted to come by and talk to me about this stuff, this IBC stuff. And neither one of them had gotten licensed yet. They knew nothing about anything. And they come in and they start telling me about IBC. Well, they didn't do a very good job telling me about it. And so after meeting for a while, I said, look, just give me those books and I'll read them and I'll get back with you. And at first they weren't going to give me the books. And probably had they not given me the book, I wouldn't have gone to the next step. But as soon as I started reading Nelson's book, and I've got this is the book, this is the original book I was handed back in 2009. So what is that, 16 years ago? And I got to reading the book and I thought, wow, this makes perfect sense. I mean, it clicked for me immediately. And I was thinking, this has got to be a much better place to save and borrow money than the banks. It has to be. And so that's how I started. Now, I asked him, okay, who's the guy you two are going to be working with? And it was a gentleman out of Colorado. And I said, well, so I called him back a couple of days later. I said, if you, when's he coming into St. Louis? That's where I'm from. And they said, well, he'll be in Friday of this week. I said, okay, I'll change my schedule. If you just tell him to give me 30 minutes, sometimes Friday, I want to come and ask him some questions. And they arranged that. And so I had, I'd read the book, had a lot of questions, and I met with this gentleman and asked him a lot of questions, and he answered them satisfactorily. And so I said, all right, here's what I want to do. I'm going to I want you to come in like a Tuesday morning, fly in from Colorado to St. Louis. You get the first flight in. Tell me when you arrive. You're going to stay all day Tuesday, and then the next day, Wednesday, and we'll get a flight out Wednesday evening. And I said, during that 36-hour period, I will schedule as many of the best possibilities there are, and you and I are going to go explain some of my closest relationships, how this stuff works. So he said, all right, so we did that. And to tell you the truth, I felt like about the second meeting, I was asking him questions and kind of explaining things differently the way he was. And together we were getting our point across. So we probably saw 9 or 10 of my closest relationships, all of them were teachers, and every one of them wanted to do an application. We did all these applications. Now, these were existing clients, so great relationship with them. So they'd never heard anything like this. So we get all these applications done, and my oldest daughter was kind of like my coordinator back in those days. So the three of us meet with these people, and again, it was cherry picking, it was low hanging fruit. And I then told this gentleman, I said, I want to send all these applications in. It'll take a few weeks to get them through underwriting. We're going to get them, we're going to work really hard, stay focused, get them all through underwriting. And then you fly back in and we'll just repeat. You come in early one morning, scheduled to go out late the next evening, and we'll go back and see all these people. So he comes back in, we see all these people, every one of them wrote checks, set up the banking policy concept. Well, back in those days, I saw some people in our office and some people actually went to their home. I'll never forget this. We're going to the last meeting, and it's a retired English teacher. No, she was still working then, but it's an English teacher. Her husband worked with a electric co-op business. And I don't know, they gave us a check for maybe $110,000. So we're getting back in my car, and the guy who's going along with me is in the passenger side. My daughter's in the back seat. Well, during those 2 days, she's picking up all these checks. And at the end she's in the back seat. She says, "Dad, I have over $1 million in my purse right now." And I said, "Well, don't lose them." And that's how we started. So then it just kind of went from there. It's changed my whole career. It's funny. I'm somewhat resentful that I could be in this business for 24 years and nobody had ever told me about this. I had no idea that policies could be built this way. I didn't know what a paid up edition rider was. And so then we just took off from there. It's been a great ride for the last 15, 16 years.
So when did you first meet Nelson after reading that book in 2009?
So, David, when was the first night of clarity in Nashville? Was that the summer of 2010?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So Lee, to answer your question, it was at that first night of clarity that David and Nelson and Carlos and I guess Robert at the time put on Nashville. Bruce Wayner and I drove to Nashville together, and that's the first time I met Nelson and really met any of these guys. I can remember walking in, and there's all these different books over on this table. I think I went and bought one of every one of them. I enjoy reading, and I tell people today that I've been doing this 40 years. That's a long time. I've sat in on over 20,000 conversations with people. 7,000 or 8,000 of those conversations have happened since July of 2009. I've read a good 250 plus books. This was the first one. Carlos's book, How Privatized Banking Really Works, was the second one. And I was sucked in immediately. I thought this is just so much common sense. And so that was my first time meeting Nelson. And then, of course, David, if you remember, we had you guys come into St. Louis, I think a couple times. We had Carlos come in one time, and he had read the Dodd-Frank Act, which is 1,000 pages. I think he read it. And he came in and first of all, I thought, who reads 1,000 pages? But he comes in and to St. Louis, and there's probably 25 of us in the room, and he starts telling us what this Dodd-Frank Act is saying. And, I don't know if people understand, there was a bail-in back in 08 and 09. Excuse me, it's a bailout. And Carlos says, yeah, now, if there's not a bailout the next time, which there probably won't be, there'll be a bail-in. And so we said, well, Carlos, what's that mean? He says, well, you deposit your money in a bank, and if there's another bailout situation occurs and the government doesn't bail them out, then all of a sudden, you as a bank customer, they're going to close the doors. You'll be able to get a little money out. Let's say somebody has $200,000 sitting in one of these FDIC insured CDs, which aren't insured at all. I mean, the FDIC has like $6 for every 100 they're insuring. So I tell people, if you have 200,000 sitting in the bank and that bank has problems, they'll shut things down. They'll let you get a little money out of the ATM every day. Then eventually they'll get back with you and say, hey, sorry, you can come by and get 200. I'm making these numbers up, obviously, but you can come by and get $20,000 of cash and and then $180,000 of bank stock. And is that not crazy? It's just remarkable what Nelson's story of figuring this out, and then sharing it like it's been done, and the fact that there's a succession plan for the NNI is just critically important. So that's how I got to hang out with Nelson several times that way. Then I started attending the think tanks, and I've been to every think tank unless there was another commitment that was really a commitment where my wife didn't want me to go, is to be honest. So I'd rather disappoint Nelson than my wife. And so, I just got a chance to sit around with Nelson a lot and just ask questions. And I'll tell you one kind of funny thing. This was towards the end of Nelson's time here on Earth, but I had was a Catholic priest that I coached as a football player years ago, and he helped me develop a thing that we call the Wisdom Accelerator. And he says, Mark, how do you get wisdom? And I said, I don't know how. And he said, well, you take knowledge, you get knowledge about a subject like IBC, and then you go have experiences explaining what you've learned. He says, but then you got to have mentors with wisdom. So if I want mentors with wisdom about IBC, I'm going to go right to the source. I'm going to go to Nelson, and then I'm going to hang out with David and Carlos and Robert, et cetera. So, that's how that part's going to work. So this Father Larry Hoover, who again was a player I coached many years ago, he says, Mark, I got a suggestion for you. The people with the most wisdom are logically the oldest people, or the older people. And a lot of times young people don't listen to older people. He said, but I want you to think about who are some of the older people you know and respect. So the first two people came to mind were my dad and Nelson. My dad was a farmer, owned a grain business, raised 9 kids. I never heard my dad raise his voice. Well, at the time, my dad was about 90. And how old was Nelson when he passed, David? In his late 80s?
88.
Okay, so think about this for a day of wisdom, acceleration. I lived 2.5 hours from my dad's home. And I decided back then that every other week I was going to drive there, spend 6, 8, 10 hours talking, asking questions. I even tape recorded some of his answers. I wrote down I learned stuff I had no idea about with my dad. So I left my garage, which is 150 miles from my dad's garage, and I called Nelson sometime shortly out of the garage. And I drove 2.5 hours, and I'm pretty sure I was on the phone with Nelson for 2 hours and 25 minutes of that 2.5 hours. It was just tremendous education, information, wisdom. I remember one time on that trip, at one point he goes, and I mean, this was towards the end of Nelson's life, but he says, Mark, I just think you're making this too complicated. And I said, yeah, Nelson, that's what math teachers do. I said, I'm not going to argue with you, Nelson. I'm going to keep trying to make it simpler. But gosh, the things. So then I have 2.5 hours of that. Then I have 5 or 6 hours with my dad. I mean, it can't get any better than that. I was much wiser at the end of that day when I got up that morning talking to those two guys.
Listen to that story. I know how methodical you are and how you schedule things and how critically important that is for you. So you prioritize what's important to you on that schedule. And boy, I wish I had that ability to do that. I just keep bouncing back and forth, so.
David, I turned 70. I'm now 71. So about 18 months ago, I woke up during the middle of the night. It was like 3:45 in the morning because I looked at the clock. It's 3:45. And I have this thought in my head, they can't call me in my grave. Those were the exact words that I was thinking about. And so I kind of sat up in bed and like, where'd this come from? I guess because I'm going to be 70. So I go down in my basement where my office is, and I've got a recliner. That's where I do a lot of reading, thinking. I've thought about IBC a lot in that recliner. And it's just, I'm thinking, they can't call me in my grave. And I wish I would have had this feeling before Nelson was gone, because I would have probably said, "Hey, Nelson, why don't you do this?" And Nelson was already kind of doing what I'm getting ready to say, but I went back to our key people in our organization. I went to some of my kids. I have 4 daughters, and I said, "Look, you guys can't call me when I'm in my grave. That's not going to work. So I'm going to do my darndest to share as much of what I've learned, much of my wisdom, from people like Nelson Nash and people like my dad. And I'm going to be redundant at times. And so if I tell you something and it's the 19th time I've told you, just raise your hand and say you've heard it. Be polite about it. I'll tell them. But I'm going to tell you as much as I possibly can because, again, I've been on 9,000 conversations with this, and I've always got this with me, and I'll point to certain pages. I'll point to page 17 to people, and I'll say, right here, Nelson's talking about what the problem is, and then I'll tell them. I read a lot, like I said, and I've been paying a lot of attention to surveys the last few months. So whether it's CNN, Fox News, MNBC, Market Watch, Discover Credit Card Company, all these companies are surveying the American people. And what they're figuring out is that one survey says that 72% of the American people say they have financial tension. Another survey says 85% say Americans have financial tension. Another one says 92%. So I just simply tell people that the symptoms that people are dealing with today are tension, anxiety, etc. And surveys tell you that that's what's happening. And I believe by being involved with the Nelson Nash Institute, Nelson helped us understand there's 3 big challenges that the American people have. And one of them on page 17 talks about that someone else is in control of the banking functions in your life, right? Nelson talked about that many times. Okay, so I'll tell people that Nelson's basically figured out what the problems are, what the challenges are, and we've developed a process to address those problems. So you want us to help you with that. And so to me, that's all originated from page 17 of this book. Another page in this book that is just, I read it all the time and I think about it, expanding the system to accommodate all income. Well, that caused us to start realizing if somebody's making $10,000 a month net, let's say a couple, that's 120 a year, 1.2 million over 10 years, etc. As Nelson kind of implies, that's the greatest asset people have is future and generational income. And Nelson's simply saying, why not run all that money into your banking policies? And I read this first couple paragraphs to people all the time, quoting Nelson, where he says, it always sounds a bit strange to people when I say premiums and income should match. Now, people think that's crazy, right? Let's start with the very basic fact, Nelson says. Doesn't all your money go through someone else's bank now? When you get your paycheck, what do you do with it? Right. You deposit it in someone else's bank. Then you write checks against it to buy the things you want in life. While it's in the bank, the banker lends your money to someone else and makes a really good living doing it. And can't we all hear Nelson talking around that? So you asked me, first time I met Nelson, Lee, and I got off on all kinds of tangents, but I feel very blessed because I probably talked to him a good 10, 12, 15 times, kind of just me and him. We invited him to St. Louis. David, remember we invited you guys in for what we called Freedom Advisor events.
Oh, yeah. There's 3 of those, I think.
Yeah, and so we're up there doing what we do, and probably the first day setting the stage for things, and we hadn't had Nelson get up and talk till the next morning. And so that morning at breakfast, I'm talking to Nelson, and I don't know, we got to a certain point. He says, hey, coach, just put me in. Meaning that I'm ready to go. And then I think I saw that talk on YouTube not that many months ago, but he got up and gave just a great hour and a half
That was a fantastic talk he did, and we repurposed that. It's on our YouTube channel also, and that is one of our highly watched videos. But yeah, it's like, Nelson was definitely somebody who, when he was talking to somebody, he was all in, right? It wasn't just a courtesy to share with somebody. He was totally committed to that individual, and he loved, he loved people, and that's what he loved most about what he was doing. That's why he didn't want to give up his live seminars. I mean, that wasn't very efficient, was it, to talk to 20, 40 people at a time? But he wanted to know everybody personally in those groups, and that was one of his blessings that
Yeah.
he blessed everybody
Da-
with.
David, I sat in on at least two of those, and I if I sat in on one a week for the next year, I promise you every time I'd pick up something. You know, I'd pick up something invaluable. Uh, I had a guy, Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, made a comment one day in a class I was in that sometimes providing great answers isn't the real deal. Providing great questions is better. And I think Nelson was a master at asking questions. I thought uh, just what he's done is just it's a game changer for all of us. And if as you guys, David and Lee, and the rest of your group keeps this Nelson Nash Institute growing, um, the the impact it's going to have is impossible to fathom. So that's why it's just so. I'm so happy that David. It was good you came on board, and it's so critical that Carlos came on board because you guys and you now yourself, Lee, because you guys are the succession plan. Our organization is built to help people's children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. I say this all the time at age 71. I had a coach and his wife in here a couple days ago, and I said, "Look, we're built to help your uh, children, your grandchildren who you don't even have yet, your great grandchildren." Well, the Nelson Nash Institute is built for that too. And that's why it's so critically important. I hate that I'm not going to be at the think tank this time around. And again, that's wife related. Uh, so, but 6 of our people will be there. Um, we're we're in a hyper growth mode, and we're going to keep getting our people there. And we need to get our people to become practitioners because this is you got all these nuts that are, you got people write a book, and before long they think it was their idea. And the first time they write a book, they'll give Nelson credit. The second time, they probably won't. They forget who Nelson is. Uh, but that's what you guys are doing. It's at the foundation of keeping this thing going for generations to come.
Yeah, yeah. You said a couple of things that resonated. Page 17 of the book. If your client doesn't understand the problem, then the solution doesn't matter, right? And a lot of things that we see out there are solution oriented, product oriented. So that's critical important. And you also, my, IBC is a foundational financial philosophy, but for me, it's more my focus on generational wealth transfer, generational wealth knowledge personally, and you're right. If you don't have a succession plan, within your IBC coaching community, then you could lose this thing in the second generation, and it'll definitely be gone by the third. So that's critically important.
David, building on what you said about if you don't understand the problem, the solution doesn't matter. For people who watch this, especially younger people in the business, I want to just share something. I want to share an experience I had at the last think tank. And this is why I regret that I'm not going to make the next one, but a good chance I'll be at the following one. And like I said, a lot of our people will be at this one, and I'll guarantee you I'll be watching the videos of all the speakers, but that's not as good as being there. And so at this now think about it. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've sat in on 20,000 meetings. I mean, I'd ask you, David, you think you have very many practitioners that can say they sat in on 20,000 meetings?
No.
When I first started in 1985 and went full time with 4 kids at home, I asked people I trusted, and how can I make sure I succeed in this business? And several people who I trusted said, if you have 10 appointments a week, week after week after week, you cannot fail in this business. So that was just every week. And it was hard. I'd call referrals and it was painful, but I never stopped till I had 10 or more appointments a week. And I've never veered off that. So do the math. I've sat in over 20,000 meetings. So I would consider myself a veteran. And I would consider myself somebody who really understands IBC. But I want to tell you this. At the last think tank, I'm sitting there day 2 that afternoon. Jason Lowe is speaking. And he said, if you don't understand the problem, the solution won't matter. Well, I went to some of our key people who you guys know, Jenny and Devonna, and on the plane ride home, it dawned on me. I said, you guys, we've stopped in reinforcing and explaining the problem. And I said, we had too many discussions about the solution. We have too many discussions about how the policy works. And the policy does this and does that. And then people are going to get into all kinds of rabbit holes talking about, well, an investment's better and this is better and all that. And I said, so we had a renewed commitment. We went back to St. Louis after last year's think tank. And I said to myself, I'm going to explain the problem and I'm going to ask questions about the problem. And so ever since that think tank, we basically explained 3 challenges. One is what Nelson talks about on page 48, the fact that we get a 0% return on all of our future and lifetime and generational incomes. That's one. 2 is what he explains on page 17. I call it the OPC challenge, by the way. That's the acronym we use. O stands for opportunity loss on our greatest asset, which is our future income, our lifetime income, our generational income. Nobody hardly thinks about the opportunity loss in the generational income. So that's the O. The P is the problem. Someone else is controlling the banking functions in our lives. You get that on page 17, basically. And then C stands for control. Well, how often does Nelson talk about that? We all have the option to control more of our income, more of our assets, but in reality, the banks and governments control it. So whenever I have meetings, there's times people want to argue about the product. Well, I always go back to the challenges first. I explain the problems. And David, we had a renewed commitment because we attended that think tank and because Jason Lowe made the comment he made. I promise you, every think tank I've been to, as a football coach, I used to go to clinics for the last 3 days. There'd be 22 different coaches up there, and I'd try to write down every word they said. Well, finally, one year, a veteran coach said, Mark, quit trying to hear everything they're saying. Just really listen and find 1 or 2 things that somebody says that you can apply on Monday. That was a weekend. On Monday, you can apply it. Well, that was the one thing. Now, there were other things, but we laugh about it around here. Had we not, there were about 10 of us went to the think tank last year, and the only reason there's not more than 6 this time is because those people, that new date you have, David, really screwed us up.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
That's Lee's fault.
But had I not gone to the think tank last year and our people not gone, we wouldn't have taken another giant leap the next week. So anyway, I guess that's kind of a sermon as why everybody should go to the think tank.
Yeah, just a point of clarity for the audience. The think tank is not a sales marketing event. So we're not saying, okay, here's how you can sell more life insurance. It's best case solutions. It's about redefining the simplicity of the concept. It's staying consistent with the messaging, talking about the language. Yeah, we got case studies. We have ideas that, all that stuff, but it's essentially, a big group hug and let's rethink our thinking, quote unquote. That's, Nelson used to say a lot all the time.
So, David, the think tank before that I went to, I think I told you this. I had decided I was done. I thought Carlos is like me getting older. Nelson's gone. I'm done. Well, I get there. I really was out of respect for you and Carlos. I was coming back to kind of say hi and bye. Well, then you guys organized that thinking exercise where you got everybody who attended in that big room, and Jason Lowe and Richard Canfield did just a phenomenal job helping all of us think through stuff. What would help the thing, and so on and so forth. And then, if you remember, we had breakout sessions at each table, and each table then would answer questions, and then you put all those answers up on the wall. Well, when they were going from table to table to table, one spokesman got up at each table and gave their responses to whatever was talked about. And I'm listening to, wow, that person at that table, they really care about people. They're not just here selling stuff. They genuinely want to get better at helping people understand how powerful this is. And then the next table. And by the end of that, I think I came up to you, David, maybe after that. But
You did.
But I said, hey, I wasn't coming back. I'll be back. Now I will be, because I thought you guys have done a great job of attracting and selecting the right kinds of people with your interview process. And I just say this, I go to these life insurance company conventions, and they're good people, but it's not the same high character in that room. I had one time somebody say about that room, I'm talking about somebody from the company, well, why are you guys doing it this way? They said, well, this is a pretty commission motivated group here. That was with the insurance company. Good people, but commission motivated.
Well, that's good for the company, man.
Yeah, but it's not. It's better. The company do real well to just, if that company could go get all the people in that room, in your room, and bring them over to their convention, they'd set records.
Yeah, for another point of clarification, we're talking about, if somebody wants to become an authorized IBC practitioner, they can't just, mail a check. They have to go through an interview process. And like Mark said, we're looking for people who are committed to helping people, staying true to the message. And if they do it right, then they'll do very well. So they'll take care of itself. But those are the types of folks that we're looking for,
But you see, David, you guys developed a system, an interview process to weed some, the bad characters out, and you've really attracted the type quality people that you want in it. And life insurance companies, unfortunately, don't have a system for that. And that's why there's a 95% failure in the life insurance business. That's another stat that I've looked at very closely over the last year or two. And anybody listening to this can go do this, but just go research what percent of real estate agents fail, what percent of life insurance agents fail, what percent of investment advisors fail. Every discipline is 90% plus. Think about that. We're in an industry that has 90% plus failure. Well, how can that industry do anything significant? It can't. It's got to have something like the Nelson Nash Institute being the catalyst.
So, Mark, you shared that, IBC has changed your life. Do you have any examples of how IBC has changed your clients' lives? You work with a lot of educators and coaches.
Oh, absolutely. I have hundreds of them. We teach a thing, Lee, that when people put money in an asset like a 401k, okay, and the world teaches us to max out our 401k, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but when you put money in a 401k, you're 30 years old, you can't get that money back out, right? You put, the Dave Ramseys are saying, go get your home paid off as quick as possible. Well, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but you need to understand if your home's paid off and you don't at least have a home equity line of credit set up, then that's technically money you can't access either. So we call those red circle assets. Okay. We meet with people and we use red and green. If you can get money out of an asset, it's green. If you can't, it's red. People who come in have 98, 99% of their assets are in red circles. 1-2% is in green circles. So we learned, somebody was quoted to say this: debt finds people who don't have access to any of their money. Okay, debt finds them. Opportunity finds those people who do have access to their money. Okay, well, everybody who comes in here, we do these thinking exercises with them, and it's like second grade math and with colors. So they look at it and say, well, after a while we say, you see any problem here? Yeah, everything's in red. Yeah. And you got any money in green? Only over there at the bank. And then we show them, yeah, you put it in the bank. We have a simple saying. We say, you ever notice that you put your money in the bank and you make about that much? And then you go borrow money from the bank and they charge you about this much? Does that seem like a very good deal? And then we explain how Nelson teaches us people put money in these dividend-paying whole life insurance policies, and they keep putting it in there, and they don't necessarily ever take any of their money out, right? So they keep getting a higher and higher dividend on this increasing sum of money. Meanwhile, they use this as collateral. Ryan, with James Nethery,
Ryan Griggs,
yeah, he had this in a note, in an article, probably in one of your guys' note things, but he said, when is the lender also able to guarantee the collateral? Well, banks don't do that, right? So, but life insurance companies do. So we tell people, they'll loan you money. They don't even ask what you want it for because they love your collateral and they're guaranteeing the collateral, okay? So, Lee, to answer your question, the way so many have been helped, the reason 70, 80, 90% of the people in this country are experiencing financial tension is real simple. They don't have any money in green circles. So whenever the air conditioning goes out, they need $5,000, they're going to go borrow the bank's money, right? And they're going to pay that much for it. Meanwhile, they got money in the bank that they're making this much. And I'll ask them, say, why didn't you take this money out and go buy it? I said, well, then we wouldn't have any money in green circles. See the problem? So the simplest way I can answer what we do for hundreds of people is we are addressing the problem, the symptoms of financial tension, financial anxiety. And a lot of times I ask people, I had a couple in here the other 2 mornings ago. Their names are Ron and Sophie. They're in their 70s. And I said, you guys feel any financial tension? And they go, no. And I said, I wonder why. Did you used to experience financial tension? They go, oh, yeah. And ultimately, they arrived at the fact they got $600,000 sitting in their banking policy, in their life insurance policy, $600,000 in cash. They're putting all of their income, all of their retirement income, all of their Social Security is flowing into these banking policies. So they got this pool of money. It's filling up every month. They're pulling money out to pay their electric bill, their groceries. And Ron says, how could we possibly have financial tension with this type of a banking system set up? And I said, that's the right answer, Ron. And so the biggest thing I think we do is we're addressing, we got all excited about the COVID, pandemic, right? Well, there's a big pandemic going on when 70 to 90% of the working and retired Americans are experiencing financial tension, anxiety. It's harming marriages. It's causing scarcity mindsets. That's what Nelson did. He came up with a way to address the symptoms that people are feeling. Government has no clue about this. Financial world doesn't really have a clue about it. The financial world is helping people accumulate, and that's important. But who's helping people save and utilize money? Well, I think it's the Nelson Nash Institute.
Yeah. Yep. You nailed it, man. That's what Nelson brought to the table. And he said something sometime. I said, please don't say that, Nelson. He'd say, he goes, I didn't really invent this. I just brought a scale to it. And what he was talking about was whole life insurance and policy loans. Okay. But describing and owning the banking function was the paradigm shift. And that's what people don't understand that Nelson Nash brought to the equation. That is the brilliance of the man, and that is the uniqueness of his message. And so that's what and we try to promote that. We try to reinforce that and get it out there as much as we can. But sometimes everybody tries to quote unquote, everything I say is a Nelson Nashism, by the way. Everybody quote unquote tries to reinvent the wheel, okay, for different reasons.
David, pretty much everything that we talk about around here, it originated with Nelson. It originated with something that he said or did. Now we have a patented process to help people address those OPC challenges we talk about, but it all originated from me reading this book and then reading Carlos's book, How Privatized Banking Works. And again, the financial world, which has 90% failure in it, they're out there teaching people how to accumulate money. And it doesn't matter. They don't even know what the financial picture is of the people who are talking to them. I mean, it's insane what's going on in the industry. So to me, those investment advisors, they can keep doing what they're doing, and they're doing good stuff in a lot of cases. All the tax people do what they do, but somebody's got to be doing the foundational stuff of helping people take control of the banking functions in their lives, helping people understand the opportunity losses they're experiencing, helping people understand the importance of control. Again, if you are in control of your assets and your income, opportunity finds you. When you're not, the banks find you in a big way. I remember one seminar, David, several people in the audience were starting to discuss illustrations and dividends being higher back then than they are today. And if I remember correctly, Nelson just finally, he's sitting listening, and he finally had to stand up and remind everybody, if you don't understand the problem, the numbers don't matter. That statement.
Well, I used to chase the dividend scales too. So, and so going back to your comment about Nelson, always answering questions with questions. The reason we have the first, second, third, fourth, fifth edition of that book is because at least the last two editions was because of we kept getting pushback on, well, these illustrations, they're out of whack. It's not. Don't worry about the numbers. It's the concept. Okay. So anyway, the fifth edition was the last time we ever addressed that issue, and said, get over it. Get over it. You're focused on, you're majoring in the minors.
David, yeah. If you think about it, everybody in this country practically goes to this financial institution called a bank, and they deposit money in checking, they deposit money in savings, they borrow money. And I don't imagine there's been one of them ever gone to the bank and asked for an illustration. They haven't asked any of that to be illustrated. So it doesn't make sense if this is a utilization, not an accumulation vehicle. Another pet peeve of mine was, and I try to politely correct people when they say, now in this investment, this banking policy or this life insurance investment, I apply to say, well, I don't really look at it as an investment, because with an investment, that's when you're taking risks you can lose. This is a savings concept. So I think that's one of our challenge. Even those people who are in the Nelson Nash Institute, especially the newer folks, you just really got to make sure you understand this is totally different than what the financial world's teaching.
Yeah, capital formation, man. Capital savings. Yeah, launching that. Opportunities will find you when you have the assets, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, big time. And I can give countless examples of that. I can give
Sure.
examples of a one client pulled $250,000 out of his policy. Now that wasn't his money, right? He borrowed 250 from the insurance company, and he paid about 5% interest on that. So he paid over the next year. He paid about $5 for every $100 of the insurance company's money, right? He invested that in a business opportunity with his aunt and first cousin. Well, that business earned about 40% in the first year. It was an established business that was purchased by his aunt. So at the end of that first year, I was able to say, okay, for every $5 you paid the insurance company, you made $40 over here. So you made $35 on every five. So you made 700% return on your money because that opportunity found you. And if you didn't have the banking system that could get to that money so readily, this would have never happened. So that's another thing that's why illustrations don't matter. You can't quantify what this thing does. It's impossible.
Well, Mark, you have shared so much with us today, and you obviously have a lot of experience over the years. And we like to end our podcast episodes by asking everyone, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
Well, it's a different way of it means a lot. It's a different way of thinking. Um, it's a it's a way to address one of the biggest problems in this country. That is that people don't have access to their money. Um, I mean, I just tell you this: I have close to $20 million that'll be flowing to my next generation in my business because of infinite banking, and that's going to keep getting bigger. Um, we have this thought that we're going to try to get what we do to 30 million people. And we've given ourselves 25 years to do it, from January 1 of 2020 to December 31 of 44. If we do that, and we're in hyper growth mode, if we do that, we'll cause my grandkids' generation to pass over, conservatively speaking, pass over $100 trillion of additional dollars tax-free to the next generation. It'll change the trajectory of the country. Now, I'll be 90 at that time, so maybe I won't even be around. But all of these things I'm talking about, all are a result of IBC. When I had a guy teach me this a long time ago, I think we all we have a picture of the way things can be, and maybe it's like a 5x7 picture frame. And then it gets to be 8.5 by 11, and then it gets to be 11 by 14, and so on. Well, my picture, when the first time I met Nelson, my picture of this was, maybe like this. Now there's no boundaries on it. It's just that's why, David, you and Carlos are so important, that you keep policing this thing, because we can't have people out there contaminating it. And we have well-meaning people who are out there doing stuff, and they just don't understand it well enough, and they're contaminating it. And so IBC is just it's a different way of thinking. It's freedom. It's like the cavalry showed up to rescue all of us. It just is. It's one of those concepts that are just you can't quantify it. It's just phenomenal, and that's why I get so ticked off when ignorant people, people who know-it-all type people that think they understand everything. In fact, I've had a couple relations of mine tell me that, well, we don't need to do IBC. And I have a one person that said, yeah, you don't, because you've been successful, you've been entrepreneurial, you've built plenty of assets, but that doesn't mean the other 80% who say they're experiencing financial frustration, that doesn't mean that they don't need to hear about it. So why don't you stop telling them they don't need to hear about it? And then I said, but the other 20% who aren't experiencing financial tension, you have a problem that you're not aware of. all this wealth you built is going to disappear in about 3 generations if you don't do something about it. So I believe we can help everybody in the country. We can help 70-80% of them with both the tension and generationally. And then the 20% who tell me and almost brag, well, no, I've got it made. I don't have any tension. I say to them, yeah, but you got an opportunity loss that's a lot bigger than you can imagine, because all that time and effort and work you spent to build those assets, they're all going to dissipate in 3 generations. That's what research tells us. So you might want to talk to us about that. So that's way too long of an answer, Lee, but IBC is just it's one of the most remarkable things that's ever happened to me.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. We really appreciate you and all that you've done with the infinite banking concept.
You're welcome. Appreciate being on here.